Okay, so we've discussed in the previous shiurim on Liqutey Moharan, Torah Parasha, Emor HaCohenim, a mode of prayer, a mode of tefillah that is both hidden and physical, and the explanation of that is that there is a time that we actually pray, and then there is the rest of the time, and the rest of the time when we make sure to protect ourselves from spiritual things that could lead us astray, and not only that, but just sort of nonsense, things that aren't in any clear way beneficial, that this provides us an extra power in our prayer. And so it is hidden in that it is by negation. We're not actually doing anything actively, it's actually the not doing. And it is physical in that our entire body is involved in not doing. Where you could say by positive mitzvahs that the hand that gives the tzedakah, that this hand is involved. And by the prayer we can say that the mouth and the heart are involved in saying the prayer. These are only individual limbs. And when we refrain from something that the Torah tells us to refrain from, that we're refraining using our entire body. And this gives us the first aspect of this new modality of prayer that we're learning about in Liqutey Moharan base, which is, Rabbi Nachman tells us, this is the way that Mashiach prays. And the first aspect of this is that we have a sword, it's like a double-edged sword. And the fact that there are these two aspects to our prayer gives us the double-edged sword, and also it gives us something else. It gives us the self-control to be excited during the right times and calm during the other times when the situation calls us for being calm, and not to be calm in a place that we should be excited, not to be excited in a place we should be calm. The metaphor here is that we don't cut ourselves with our own sword, so to speak, becoming very excited in the prayer, which is good, but then taking that excitement out into the world after prayer and being excited about nonsense that, well, otherwise wouldn't be harmful, this nonsense, unless we get too excited about it. And I've provided plenty of examples of that in the previous classes. Now, the Yetzer Hara is very clever and knows that we're going to do this and has a plan. And the Yetzer Hara's plan is, oh, I see, you've established self-control. You've established a time to be energized and a time to be calm and calculating. And now all the Yetzer Hara has to do is to shift the timing a little bit, so that this is sort of metaphorical to cutting off the head, because when the timing is set right, it's like our brain is connected to the heart in a proper fashion, that our heart is a very powerful motivating tool, and that our brain sort of turns the steering wheel in the right direction. So all the Yetzer Hara has to do is make this into something that is habitual and something that isn't filled with intention when we do it. And so we can observe simply that at the end of davening we get to Aleinu at the end of Shacharis, which is the very last prayer in Shacharis, according to many versions of the prayer, and according to all versions of the prayer, Aleinu is very close to the end. And we have a special halacha that we should be special intention during this prayer of Aleinu, a special Yiras Hashem, and we should have a great energy. We should recite this prayer with a full voice. There's a bow in this prayer that is not one of the primary bows in the davening, and nonetheless we are supposed to do this bow it should be a big bow and a strong bow. And why are there so many halachas about being big and strong with this final prayer? Because if we putter out early in the davening, then we know that the timing has shifted a little bit. And we also should start reciting the prayer. There are many preliminary prayers before beginning from Baruch She'amar or from Hoidu, depending on which version of the prayers you use. But either way, we have plenty of time to warm up, so that when we come in with the first word of the prayer, it is very strong, and when we have the last word of the prayer, it is very strong. So the first word and the last word are connected in the prayer. And this is a way that we can ensure that we're in the right direction. But we also want not only to be able to check ourselves, but we have to actively make sure that the Yetzer Hara does not have the ability to shift us. And so we began discussing this idea in the previous class, that, well, first of all, one thing that the positive mitzvahs do just because the negative mitzvahs are like the whole body, and so they have a certain advantage over the positive mitzvahs, but so too the positive mitzvahs have an advantage, which is that they give us timing. They give us a clear schedule. They exist within time. They have a special relationship with time. There's no particular time that we're not supposed to eat a cheeseburger as Jews. It's all the time. But it's not like only on Tuesdays or something, or only in the day. But the mitzvah of tefillin or something is primarily in the day. And many of the positive mitzvahs have this time relationship more so than do the negative mitzvahs. So we get the power of time, which is what the Yetzer Hara wants to separate us from, the power of using our time in a conscious way specifically. And we discussed an idea from Kabbalah here that what is this faculty that keeps us aligned in our time? It's called mishpat. All of the mitzvahs aseh, we brought a statement last time from the genius Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who says that the word mishpat is used usually in the Mikra, in the scriptures, to refer to positive mitzvahs, and therefore the word mishpat encapsulates all the positive mitzvahs in it. But the word mishpat is not only a culmination of other things. It isn't only, well, you get the left and the right, and you put them together, and that's mishpat. If you didn't have the left and the right, then you wouldn't have mishpat. It isn't like that. Why would we think it is like that? Why does Rabbi Nachman have to tell us, Ki mishpat hu amud da'emsa isa? Mishpat is the middle line. Why does he have to tell us that? You would seemingly already know that. But then we see that Rabbi Nachman uses an Aramaic phrase here, amud da'emsa isa. This is a language from the Zohar, which is written in the language of Aramaic. And if we're referencing the Zohar and we're referencing a Kabbalistic idea, we have to consider an additional perspective, which is that there is a world of truth. You have the lower three worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, which are especially Asiya, the lowest world. It's called Alma Shikra. It's called the world of lies. But if there's a world of lies, there has to be a world of truth that corresponds to. So there is, in this highest world, we discussed last time that there is a principle from the Shlomo HaKadosh, who is one of the great Kabbalists of time, shortly after the time of the Rizal. And the Shlomo explains a categorical difference between the upper world of truth, and the lower worlds of less and less truth, until you get to Alma Shikra, the world of lies. Which is that in the world of lies, it seems to be that there is a sort of trickle-down mode of existence. We have our Sephirotic tree of the spheres, and Chokhmah is the one at the top, and it would seem to be that Chokhmah is the first thing. First you get an idea, then Bina, you develop the idea, and gradually you make it into a physical thing. It reaches the areas of Yesod and Malchus. Even in the first Liqutey Moharan, we discuss this version of reality, because that's where we start, guys. We start in the world that we're in. And we can draw influence from the world of truth. The world of truth, in Kabbalah it's explained, the world of Atzilus, that although there are separate faculties of the 10 spheroids, it is impossible to distinguish them because it is so completely bright that it's like, so to speak, like being blinded by the light. And us as limited beings have a hard time thriving in such an environment as that. We need things to be brought down to our level a little bit. And so we have these lower worlds where we can function in this way, that we get an idea and we develop the idea. And we see that when we talk to other people, we often attempt to, when we try to influence other people, we often try to influence them in this way. And sometimes when it doesn't work, it's frustrating for people. And this frustration is, I know something that makes sense. And if I tell someone else, it should make sense also to them because it's logically sound. I don't have any fallacies or anything like that. I have peer-reviewed research papers that I triangulated my news sources. It makes sense. Why do people not listening to me? It should make sense to them too. Mm-hmm. Because that's only how things work in the world of lies. In the world of truth, the Shlomo explains that reality emanates from Tiferes, from the very center attribute, and it sort of opens out from there. And you get the rest of Zeranpin, actually a little bit like this image that we've got here, this new logo. And once Zeranpin is complete, now the Zeranpin in Atzilus is worthy, it is a ready recipient to draw down the greater intelligence of Chachma and Bina from the higher Partsufim worlds. I don't want to overuse that. Realms, I guess, universes, maybe universes of Abba and Ima. You can see with the development of a child that you can try to tell a small child information, and it makes sense how you're explaining it. I mean, you're even boiling it down for them, and you're saying it in a simple way. It just doesn't go in their head. Why not? Well, because they're just not there yet. Well, they grow a little more, and suddenly, boom, they're there. And suddenly you can teach them things. You can teach them more than you were trying to teach them before. And it's like, wow, what changed? I'm saying exactly the same thing. They developed. They grew more from the inside out. And once this internal growth resulted in outward growth, then we can draw down the moichin, then we can draw down the intelligence. Once someone is in a state to receive what we have to say, once we're at an emotional place with a person where they can receive what we have to say, then we can explain things to them, and even if what we're saying doesn't make so much sense, they might receive what we're saying, not to mention if it makes sense. So this is the fundamental difference between the world of truth and the world of lies. And so as pertains to our teaching of the Liqutey Moharan, we see that the center, Tiferes, is not merely an emergent factor of the sides. It isn't only that Mishpat is a combination of all the mitzvahs, or a combination of left and right, but yet it's its own thing. It's a little bit like a bridge. Rabbi Nachman very famously said that man has to cross a narrow bridge. And that's what a bridge is. There's things on either side, but if the bridge didn't have any mamashis, didn't have any stuff in and of itself, then we wouldn't be able to cross it very well, would we? A bridge isn't just a hole with two sides. It's its own thing. So we're going to continue on this theme of the bridge being its own thing, of mishpat being its own thing. So we can really see, how do I acquire this attribute of mishpat in a way that I can use it to maintain my proper emotional relationship with the various situations in my life, primarily with prayer and all other things, is the simple way that we're talking here. So we continue inside the text. So Rabbi Nachman says, Ki mishpat hu amoreh emse isa, for mishpat is the center column. Hayinu. He's going to give us something somewhat more practical now. Hakoleya im kli zaynoi el hamakim shetzarich. Someone who utilizes their weapon, which in this case means prayer, to the place that it is needed. Now, Rabbi Nachman did not say to like the correct place or to the center place or something like that. But the place that is needed. So there is an emergent factor that is worth discussing here, which is that it's clear that our emotional state affects the way that we learn, as we've discussed. If you say something to someone that makes sense, but they aren't in an emotional place to hear what you have to say, your relationship with them is not that, then they won't hear it. Now, it's not the way that you intend. And if the emotional state changes, suddenly the intellect changes as well. The intellectual conversation changes. And what didn't make sense before, the exact same words suddenly do make sense because of an emotional shift. So we see that the way that we see things in a factual way is affected by our emotional state. So Rabbi Nachman giving us this tool of mishpat, which properly schedules our emotions, so to speak. It gives us an ability we will pray for better things. We will pray for more needed things. There's a statement in the Liqutey halachos that everybody believes that God answers prayers, but people just don't believe in their own prayers. And what might be causing them not to believe in their own prayers? They could be praying for, it could go one of two ways. Praying for something that they don't believe that they can actually ask for. It is beyond their belief. Or they could be praying for something that they don't really feel is that worthy of prayer. They feel like, I could just go get this on my own. And so the prayer is half-hearted as a result of that. Now, one suggestion that could be given might be to push. And say, just believe harder that you actually can ask for this particular thing. But if I wasn't really believing in the first place, how do I know even what it means to believe harder? It's sort of vague advice. You mean like daven louder? You're like go like, what does it mean to believe harder? Believing is not like a hard thing, really. So, there's a piece of advice given about prayer that everybody should daven, all Jews anyway, if you're relevant in Jerusalem, should daven for a house with 10 rooms in Jerusalem. Why 10? Why not 9? Why not 11? Well, it does say in Sefer Yitzirah that there's 10, and there's not 9, and there's not 11. So how do I relate with that information? And the advice follows that, because if you pray for a house with 11 rooms, you don't really believe you could get a house with 11 rooms. You're not going to pray that. It's like going to the bank and asking for a loan you know for sure you're not going to qualify for. It's like a joke. You're doing it because you think you ought to, but it isn't really something that you're going to do full on. If you don't think you can win a ball game, you're not going to go in all the way unless you think you can win. And if you play a team that's way, way, way better than your team, you won't actually believe yourself if you say, I believe I'm going to win. You'll have a little voice in your head, maybe a big voice that says, I don't know, that team's pretty good. I do my best, yeah. So another approach is to adjust our tefillos to be something that we believe that we can achieve. And the other side of the advice is that if someone davens for a house with 9 rooms, then they say, well, I could probably pull it together to get a house with 9 rooms. Something about 10. 10 is the magic number there. Or whatever number is relevant to you. I mean, if you already have a lot of belief in your prayers, maybe you could daven for a house with 15 rooms. But still, the advice is not 14, not 16. It's 10, we're saying mida beinanis here. Whatever the 10 is for you. But how do we identify what is the prayer that corresponds to the house with 10 rooms, this ideal prayer, the makom hatzarich, the sweet spot? If we daven in the sweet spot with full intention, a place that we can daven with full intention and full belief, there's a very good chance that we will actually see that prayer answered. And there's a twofold benefit to seeing a prayer answered. One is that you get the actual prayer, you get the thing you daven for. But also your belief in your own power of prayer increases. And so does the expansion of then what you think you can pray for reasonably. So the advice here is to pray reasonably, but we need to find the sweet spot to start, where the prayer is something believable that can be answered and we can grow from there. And so this is Bechinas Mishpat. This is that when we establish this emotional intelligence, that I'm going to become excited about prayer and be calm and intelligent about everything else. And we maintain that this must stay on schedule, and the mitzvahs aseh, the positive mitzvahs, allow us to do this. Then we will find that our ability to gauge what is the proper prayer for us to be praying, what should we intend when we pray, that this becomes clearer. It isn't something that I can sit around and think about, what's a good prayer? Because if I do that, I'm only using my intelligence as it exists now. I must rather employ the advice from Rabbi Nachman so far about my emotions, and this will clarify my intelligence. And will allow me to come up with a better answer to that question, as we've discussed. It's a little bit like coffee. I could sit there and try to understand the Gemara all morning without a coffee, but if I have the coffee first... By the way, it's mutter by all opinions to drink black coffee before Shacharis. If I have the coffee first, the whole thing is going to go better. So it's so too by the emotional. Why wait to refine my intellect with these emotional tools when the intellect is going to work better? All my answers will be better if I do this avoid it first. So then, Rabbi Nachman says something that sounds very similar. So we're aiming our davening el makam hanachin to the proper place. Makam hatzarich, to the place where it is needed. And that we're not aiming the prayer to the left or the right, or you could also read it, that we're not aiming it to the left or right, to the sides, but rather to the middle. Now, since we already have some understanding of what it means the middle, and what it means the proper place where the prayer is needed, we have a question now. Why do you need to tell us both, not the left and right, and the middle? Don't those mean the same thing? We already understand that the middle has a mashmaos to itself, that it's its own thing, the middle. So why are you could just say the middle, and that would imply to me already not the sides. But let's take a little bit deeper of a look into the understandings that we've established so far. First of all, how do we know that mishpat is a thing unto itself? The only illustrations we've gotten so far of that is that, well, it isn't only a combination of all the mitzvahs. It isn't only the left and right. Okay, so you've given me isn't only, if it isn't only. But I still don't really know what it is. Okay, I see that it's that I have my emotions in the right place, my emotion more charged when I'm in prayer and less charged and more intellectual and calm when I'm not in prayer. Okay, so it still sounds like you're just saying don't get it wrong. Or if I say, well, it has to, and mishpat is also keeping myself on schedule with my emotions so the Yetzer Hara doesn't throw me off and make me become excited a little too early or a little too late or something. Still, it seems like it's all negatory. It doesn't seem like I still don't know what mishpat in and of itself is. So, we do need, so Rabbi Nachman tells us again, Elala Emsa, he reminds us again that the mishpat, the middle, is where we ought to be aiming. So we need to understand better what middle is. He's reminding us that we still need to understand better what middle is, and we still have that question. And also, this is an interesting statement that he says, don't aim to the sides, rather to the middle. Because we understand about the middle, what does it mean? Where did we learn that the middle is something unto itself? From the teaching in Kabbalah that in the world of Atzilus, the world of truth, the middle produces the sides. Well, seemingly, according to that explanation, if I'm aiming to the middle, I'm also aiming to the sides. Because they're one and the same. The sides are a product of the middle. So what does it mean to isolate the middle here? What does it mean to isolate the mishpat? So, let me continue in the text. Zeh bechinas, the answer to your question corresponds to Yechalkel devarav v'mishpat. That one is to, once they have this tool of mishpat, they are to weigh their words, or it could possibly mean their possessions, with mishpat. And this will seemingly answer our question about what is mishpat and what does it mean to focus on the middle and not the sides. So now we're going to explore this verse a little bit here from Tehillim, these words, Yichach davar b'mishpat. So pasuk Zeh nidrash kan. So this pasuk Yichach davar b'mishpat is explained in this first section of Liqutey Moharan. Ulahalan b'soif sifdalid, and it also is explained in our same teaching in Torah Base, a little bit down, a little later in Daled. We're in Gimel right now, and it'll be in Daled, the next sif. And we need to understand a little bit something about the structure of Liqutey Moharan. Someone wrote to Rabbi Gedalia Aharon Zal, who founded this Tsfat Israel community, and to a great extent the Breslov community that we know today, the Tsfat community that we know today. And they asked him a certain teaching about the sequence of things in Liqutey Moharan, and he explains to them in the Sefer Shari Tzaddik, which records his correspondences, select correspondences. Explains to them that the way Liqutey Moharan is structured is that first Rabbi Nachman will say a large, simple point, and then he will branch out and begin to give examples of that point. It isn't necessarily to be read in a chronological sort of sequence, like these are the steps in this order, but rather point, expansion, expansion, expansion. We see that these teachings continue to expand. That's the writings of Rab Nosson Zal and Liqutey Halachos, is to continue to expand from that point. We see after Rab Nosson Zal that we have Rab Chazon Zal, Nachman Chazon Zal, who write an entire book just about Shabbos according to each, not about the whole Shulchan Aruch, just Shabbos according to each teaching Liqutey Moharan. Just about Eretz Israel, the concept of Eretz Israel according to each teaching Liqutey Moharan. So this idea of expansion continues, and it's incumbent on us also to continue this expansion. We see that Reb Shalom Arush Shlita writes a great number of books on various subjects in day-to-day life corresponding to the teachings of Liqutey Moharan. Continues to expand these even outside of the getter of things that are talked about in Sifrei Kodesh. And perhaps this is one of the secrets of the famous statement of Rabbi Nachman. He says, all my teachings are like hakdamis, introductions. That it starts and it expands. As you go up, it expands more. So we know that we're going to get an example of how to practically apply this concept, an expansion of this concept of Yichachol Devar B'Mishpat. How do we actually use this mishpat in Ois Daled? So kan dorshu she'chachol devar b'mishpat gabe lo yitali yamin or l'smoil. There's the mishpat umur the emsa itza. Here we say that this statement yichachol devar b'mishpat is about focusing on the middle, focusing on the thing that produces everything else, not chasing after effects, not sort of treating the symptom. Ulahalan and in Ois Daled where we discussed this idea, there's surely in tzedakah. We have a specific example of how this applies to tzedakah. How we can use tzedakah as a tool to help us grow with respect to what mishpat actually means, and also come to a better ability to use, to practice the mishpat muscle, so to speak. How do we intend when we practice tzedakah? There's a verse in Tehillim that says the following. It's the full context of our statement, Yichachol Devar B'Mishpat, to manage our stuff or manage our words with mishpat. It is good for a man to freely give and to freely loan and to weigh his things with mishpat. The verse itself seems almost like a contradiction here. Someone should just give freely and things like this, and then you're saying that they should weigh their property in a very precise, kind of centered way. These seem to be opposite concepts. For forever, this person will not become stuck from considering all of the things in the world around them. They won't be drawn into themselves. They won't go into mech and the katnus. They will keep an expanded state. Yehi tzaddik, and this will move them in the direction, at least of being a tzaddik. And we'll understand what that means in our lesson shortly. Here's Rashi. What does it mean that it's good for a man to give freely? To give and to loan to poor people as is needed. And not to make some sort of calculation that I don't have the ability to do so. So, we're going to skip ahead a little bit to a concept that we've discussed before and now it needs to be revisited. That in the bridge between Liqutey Moharan and 1 and Liqutey Moharan 2 concerns the aspects of Yaakov and Yosef. Now we're talking mostly in Yosef territory here, which is we're concerned with what is the avodah that I'm capable of doing, how am I able to relate with my surroundings in a way that I can see the light in the things around me and not be sort of fooled by the superficiality of the things around me. And even though Liqutey Moharan 1 discusses this idea in terms of Yaakov, well, Yaakov's situation was dealing with his evil brother who is patently evil. And so at that point in time when we learned Liqutey Moharan 1, we could fairly say, look, I don't have the ability to deal with that guy. So what I'm going to do is deal with what I can deal with. I can deal with my relationship with those around me and my relationship with myself and things that are good, basically, because we see by Yosef, Yosef's, all his brothers were tzaddikim. Even though they did things to him, they threw him in a pit and they sold him, and it might be questionable things that they did, it is worthwhile for us to explore their motives and see how what they did actually was good and they were actually coming from a right place. And this is the difference between with Esav, who behaved in a patently evil way. We're not really meant to make those calculations. So
we're not supposed to try to understand Esav, is that what you're saying?
Right, at least at this stage in our avodah, in Liqutey Moharan days anyway. Mm-hmm. Yaakov could do it. Yaakov was ready to give the food off his plate to Esav. That's actually how he sort of sweetened the judgment of Esav, so to speak, how he turned the tables and reacquired the birthright that would have resulted in the fate of the world, right? If Esav had gotten that birthright, he would have returned the world to Toihu and Boihu, to just like a chaotic sort of no man's land, as says the Zohar. So it's very important that Yaakov, the good guy, acquired that superpower, the blessings of his father. And how did he do it? He gave him the food off his plate. So we can make a little bit of a Musar word here and say that until we're ready to give somebody the food off our plate, we're not really ready to try to come to terms with them. So who are we ready to give the food off our plate to? Who can we actually help around us? And I think all of us have people around us in organizations and things that we're happy to give charity to. And so one thing that we should be aware that we're doing is we're overcoming I can't when we do that. Every time that we give tzedakah, we're overcoming I can't. Now, I can't is not an entirely wrong thing. To say that I can't with a full heart daven for a house with 11 rooms in Jerusalem, there is something to that. What I can do is daven for a house with 10 rooms in Jerusalem. And then from there I can grow into. So we see that I can't is not wrong, but it can be misplaced. So what do we say about a guy like Esav? I can't even. That's actually a good response to someone like Esav, the popular phrase, I can't even. And the issue, though, is that sometimes we encounter situations in our day-to-day life that are actually before us personally to deal with. Of course, it's a famous statement that Hashem doesn't give a person anything that they don't have the tools to handle. So if a person says, I just can't, I can't even, it's not really the place for that. There is a place for that, I can't even. But we were given this situation, we were given the opportunity to give tzedakah in a way that I think all of us around us have recipients of tzedakah that we are perfectly capable of helping and is within our resources to help. And by doing so, we overcome this I can't in the wrong place. So we're starting to learn a further explanation of what mishpat is. I can't applies in both arenas. It applies both in the excitedness that I'm tired. It's already Aleinu. I already prayed for a long time. I can't even. I just can't get myself excited about the beginning of the davening. I have to. I got to get all warmed up first. No, actually, that is something someone could do. They could give it a second and say the word hoidu with more muster. That's not a huge thing. That's not a huge ask here. Look, to say every word of the davening in a big loud voice, say every word of the Yom Kippur davening, it might be fair, at least for now, for someone to say, I can't, with regard to saying every word of the Yom Kippur davening, which it's hard. It's a lot of weird words that you don't read every day in your regular Hebrew. It's a lot of poetic language. Fasting, obviously, is not easy. But what we can do is we can say the first and the last word of our davening in a big, strong voice. And this makes very clear benchmarks for us, for where my excitement is to fit within these bounds. I'm bringing my excitement from sort of this floating around me sort of state that I don't have that much control over. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. And I'm consciously pulling it into a certain boundary of time. And this is with my bookmarks, my beginning and the end of the davening, that both of these are strong. And because we have on either side of the davening a reason to say I can't. When there are things we can say I can't about, but that's not really one of them. I can just push a little bit harder to say the words at the end of the davening in a big, strong way. And there are also situations in our day-to-day life where we're supposed to be calm and calculating, but we say I can't. And maybe that is true sometimes, but I don't think it's true every time. Especially given that we have this advice from Rabbi Nachman about how to pull our excitement from our surrounding, sort of our makif, the place where it affects us, but we don't control it, sort of around us, to pull it inside of us. And so this is what it means to be yichachol davar b'mishpat, to manage our words. We'll just say that mishpat here means words in a way that has mishpat, in a way that has clear boundaries and clear proper places for all of our emotional ways to be, both the I can and I can't, and both the excitedness and both the calmness. And we accomplish this every time that we give tzedakah in any way that we do. Ubishvil zeh, kibul Yosef es habechayre davke v'Yaakov. And it's because of this attribute of overcoming I can't, which Yosef did a fantastic job at overcoming I can't. Of course, the famous story about the Egyptian noblewoman that kept trying to get him to do something he shouldn't do, and he did not at any point give in to I can't even. And when he was thrown in the pit and taken to Egypt, and he was at first a prisoner, he became basically the king of Egypt. He wasn't limited by this I can't. And so we see that starting in a place that we can is one way that we overcome I can't. Starting in a place of Yosef is a way that Yosef, where all of our brothers are tzaddikim, is a place that we can begin to access in a more meaningful way the level of Yaakov. I believe it brings in here that, you're right. So we'll read a little bit more of this explanation of the verse, Yichachol davar b'mishpat. So the Rashi explains that Yichachol davar b'mishpat means manhi chafatzev, how we manage our stuff. He's talking about tzedakah in this way, that when a person gives tzedakah and overpowers the getter of saying I can't at the wrong times, then they actually gain more self-control. They control the power of I can't. So now it makes sense that it's good for a man to give freely because he is yichachol davar b'mishpat, because now he claims the power of I can't and uses it in its right place only. We have another explanation here. Gabi in a mishpat, concerning this idea of mishpat. Lesson mishpat hu ha-mitzua v'inyan beinani. V'zehu shekazi v'yichachol davar b'mishpat. Mishpat is a centered and balanced way to be, and this is what it means that we manage our stuff, manage our words in a centered and balanced way. Ulachin omer akasuv mishpat utzedakah beYaakov ato hasisa. We see that this concept of mishpat as trained by the giving of tzedakah, that this is the attribute of Yaakov. And so we see a direct attribute of Yaakov with mishpat. So what is mishpat? Let's revisit this question one more time in terms of the bridge. It's in the middle, so it's a bridge, right? But a bridge is not only something that's in the middle. A bridge has four sides. There's two sides of which we don't want to fall, which we've been talking about this whole time, but there's also a starting place, and more importantly, there's an arrival place. The starting place serves the arrival place. The bridge goes to the other side. What is the other side? Yaakov is the other side. That I'm turning the I can't into something that I can actually handle, and I don't have to say I can't about, like dealing with Esav. There is a level at which one can deal with Esav. There is a level at which one can sweeten greater judgments than they're able to sweeten currently. By the way, to sweeten a judgment, it can't be something that we have to avoid. If the judgment is something that will get the better of us, we aren't yet in a place to sweeten it. But that isn't to say we couldn't be there. It isn't to say I can't and I will never be able to. It's only that I can't for now until I cross this bridge. Until I transfer myself from being at a level of Yosef to being at a level of Yaakov. Now, outside, we've discussed the idea of Yosef being the tzaddik emes, the original tzaddik emes. And so it seems difficult that how would I progress any more than that, going past the tzaddik emes? How could you say that there's a step of Yaakov that is a step beyond Yosef? So tell this Yaakov Yosef, Yosef and Yaakov are like one. It says in the Gemara, and I think it's brought in the Rashi, that they're considered to be sort of like one entity, and that there's two aspects to this entity. It's also written in the correspondences of Rabbi Gedalia Aharon Zal. Someone writes to him asking, even though Rabbi Nassan Zal was so devoted to Rabbi Nachman, it seems like in his prayers that he wrote, there's lots of supplications that ask Hashem to help him find the tzaddik emes. But didn't he already find the tzaddik emes? What is he looking for, somebody else? We see also after the passing of Rabbi Nachman that Rabbi Nassan Zal went around to a great many tzaddikim. So what was he doing then? What is the concept of the tzaddik emes? And Rabbi Gedalia Aharon's response was to clarify, well, there is a level of tzaddik ador. There is the greatest tzaddik in our generation. And this person has this person is a ray of the tzaddik emes. This is the closest thing to the tzaddik emes that we have is the tzaddik ador. But the tzaddik emes is an attribute spiritually that produces the tzaddik ador. It's a little bit like you could say in the world of truth that the tzaddik emes teach an emes Yaakov. Emes also is considered truth, also is considered to be a center attribute, like mishpat, like tiferes. And from this place called tzaddik emes in the high worlds come all the tzaddikim of all the doros, all the greatest of every generation. And so we're always, even when we have the tzaddik emes, we're still striving for the tzaddik emes. When we have identified the greatest tzaddik in the generation, which is Yosef. Well, who'd Yosef come from? His father, Yaakov. Who produced the tzaddik ador? Who is the tzaddik emes? This attribute, this forever uncontainable, you can't grasp it to the point that it could be grasped no more. The most that you can grasp is to identify a clear tzaddik ador. But the tzaddik ador comes from the tzaddik emes. So we see that Yaakov is this idea of tzaddik emes as relates to Yosef. Yosef gives us the tools of dealing with those around us. And why should we deal with those around us? Because it builds us up to being able to deal with those that we currently say, I can't even about, like the Esavs of the world. And it moves us in a direction that what was the Esav for me now becomes like my brother who is actually a tzaddik. There's an idea in Chassidus. Why does something fall to a low place? Because it comes from a very high source. You could say the metaphor of if you drop a ball bearing into a sand pit or something. If you drop it from higher, it's going to go further into the sand. And so there is actually a tremendous great light within Esav. Why do we think that Yitzchak had any intention of giving the blessings to Esav? Because there is actually a tremendous light. It's just something that exists outside of time and space for us. It's just that, but if we can expand our own what is time and space, like it says in the verse here, someone who, through their tzedakah, they don't ever fail to consider the entire world around them, this person starts to become the level of tzaddik. And what does it mean that they become tzaddik? That the I can't, what makes it I can't? That it's outside of my influence, but the person expands their influence. They expand what they can relate with, not in a way that I can't even, but in a way that I can, and that I can actually daven for this person. And this constant expanse is a result of this emotional regulation that Rabbi Nachman teaches us, of having the excitement during the prayer and not during the not prayer, maintaining that schedule. And so we start to see that mishpat, in fact, is this ability to expand. And the word mishpat is from shofet, from lishpot, to judge. And to be a judge of someone, we have to be in a place where we can understand where they're coming from. Otherwise, it's not a fair judgment. It's a halakha that you can't judge someone that you hate. You can't serve on a panel of judges if you hate the person that's being judged. You have to be able to relate with where that person is coming from. You have to understand what you're ruling upon. So to understand something, someone has to some extent, accept it. If someone is not in an emotional state to receive a certain piece of information, they won't receive it right. So they have to be in the right emotional state. And Rabbi Nachman gives us the tools to do this, to transition from the level of Yosef in further pursuit of the Tzaddik Emes to the level of Yaakov that was alluded to in the Liqutey Moharan 1, although was not necessarily accessible to us at that time without further exploring the idea of Yosef. Okay, any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
I do have a question.